And a visit that is full of optics. We are joined by Mr. Rashika Jayakody, who is a journalist and also a political commentator, who is joining us live from Colombo. Mr. Jayakody, let me begin by asking you this. This, of course, is Prime Minister Narendra Modi's first overseas visit after having taken charge as the Prime Minister of India for a second straight term. Now, this visit is full of optics. It is about symbolism, and it's also about offering solidarity to the people of Sri Lanka. Give us a sense as to how this visit by the Indian Prime Minister has been received in the island nation.
Thank you. And this is, by choosing to visit Sri Lanka as one of his first overseas visits after being re-elected as the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi demonstrates his neighbourhood-first foreign policy, and it's an indication that Sri Lanka will remain high on India's agenda the second term of Mr. Modi. And also, as you correctly said, it's the first visit of a foreign leader to Sri Lanka after the Easter Sunday attacks, which claimed the lives of 250 people. So I think by visiting Sri Lanka, Prime Minister Modi sends a clear message to the world that India stands in solidarity with Sri Lanka. And he also conveys that Sri Lanka is returning to normalcy, which is also a very crucial message, because Sri Lanka is now grappling with the impact of the Easter Sunday attack on the tourism sector and the overall economy. So it is in this context that we have to understand Prime Minister Modi's visit to Sri Lanka. And he also, by visiting Sri Lanka, he also demonstrates his will to work with the Sri Lankan authorities to eradicate the threat of terrorism. Now, in the aftermath of the Easter Sunday attacks, there were multiple reports indicating that especially the southern parts of India are also experiencing the threat of Islamist terrorism. So, President Sirisena and Prime Minister Modi held discussions in this regard when the Sri Lankan president visited New Delhi last month for the inauguration of Prime Minister Modi. So his discussions in Colombo, I think, will mainly be centered around the areas of security and economic cooperation.
Absolutely, indeed. That is going to be one of the crucial issues. Now, one of the things, Mr. Jayakody, that took a lot of people by surprise is the manner in which the intelligence tip-offs that had been given by India to Sri Lanka ahead of the Easter bombings, they were not acted upon. There were three clear intelligence tip-offs. The first one was given on the 4th or the 5th of April, the second one on the 11th of April, and the third one just 2 hours before the serial bombings went off, clearly listing out that these were the likely targets was given to the Sri Lankan intelligence agencies, but this was not acted upon. Do you think the two countries now should come together to put in the framework for, in fact, sharing and acting upon intelligence of this nature?
Yes, I think what happened before the Easter Sunday attacks was serious lapse in terms of national security, and currently a parliamentary select committee is probing the security lapses, and so many shocking revelations are surfacing. That has shook the very foundations of the government, because President Sirisena earlier this week said he would not convene cabinet meetings unless the sessions of the parliamentary select committee suspended. So the internal politics aside, I think now it's time to move on. It's time to correct our mistakes. It's time to adopt necessary measures to prevent the recurrence of a similar incident. So I think it's very important to have regional frameworks and intelligence sharing mechanisms. I think that is one area where Prime Minister Modi can help Sri Lanka to create a joint working structure that will help the two countries meet the threat of terrorism, because especially in the wake of these Sunday attacks, as I said earlier, there were multiple reports indicating that Islamist terrorists have sneaked into southern parts of India, especially Kerala and other parts. So it's very important that the defense forces of the two countries work hand in hand to counter this threat.
Absolutely, indeed. And also one of the other important aspects that a lot of people will be looking at, because it's certain that Beijing would be looking at these visuals that are being beamed out of Colombo, where the Indian Prime Minister has met with the Sri Lankan Prime Minister and also with the Sri Lankan President. Do you think the internal politics, whichever way it swings within Sri Lanka, will impact the India-Sri Lanka equation? Because we saw that earlier it was possibly that Sri Lanka was seeing moving more towards China. But now what we've seen over the course of the last 1.5 years is that the Sri Lankan leadership is willing to build stronger bonds with India because of the debt diplomacy that they seem to have been caught up with in the case of China.
Well, China remains a key economic partner for Sri Lanka, and China is still involved in a large number of projects in the country. However, I think from Sri Lanka's standpoint, the government should not consider its relations with India and China as mutually exclusive. I mean, one doesn't come at the expense of the other. So Sri Lanka is open to do business, to work with any country in the world. But India has always been a key strategic partner for Sri Lanka, given the close proximity between the two countries, and especially the long-standing cultural and historic ties. But I think the Prime Minister Modi will be okay with Sri Lanka dealing with China, as long as the Sri Lanka's relationships with China do not jeopardize, do not threaten the security interests of India. I think that's where the potential flashpoint is. Now, if you look at the history now, former President Mahinda Rajapaksa was among the world leaders who attended the first inauguration of Prime Minister Modi, but soon after that, leading up to the last presidential election of Sri Lanka, the relationship between Sri Lanka and India saw ups and downs. And at one point, former President Rajapaksa accused the Indian intelligence agencies of plotting to topple his government. However, after the new government came to power in Sri Lanka, President Sirisena and Prime Minister Wickremesinghe worked extremely hard to mend Sri Lanka's relations with India, and the bilateral relations saw a gradual improvement. Prime Minister Wickremesinghe and President Sirisena visited India several times, and Prime Minister Modi visited Sri Lanka 3 times in 4 years. So that's an indication that the relationships are improving. And even former President Rajapaksa, who's now the official leader of the country, visited India. I think he met Prime Minister Modi twice, if my memory serves me right, in the last 2 years. So I think now Sri Lanka is coming to the realization that it has to work with India, and it has to adopt a more balanced foreign policy, which allows the country to work with multiple partners, multiple strategic partners, while preserving its national interest. I think that's where the relationships are moving.
I think that Mr. Rashika Jaikodi could be the big takeaway from this visit of Prime Minister Modi to Sri Lanka today. It, of course, is a visit to express India's solidarity, but at the same time, he's meeting with the leaders who are presently in power, but also he's meeting with the Rajapaksa camp. Mahinda Rajapaksa cannot contest the elections that will take place later on this year, but his brother, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, is, of course, in the running for the presidential polls. Thank you very much indeed for joining us from Colombo. This, of course, is a big developing story.